Testing, okay. All right, I'm gonna pass out exams real quick. I entered scores in this morning, so you may not have seen them yet.
What was it out of?
70. So that's because the number 3 was extra credit. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yep. Okay. No, yeah, they're yours. There are a few people who need to make it up, and I'll get with you outside of class. Also, on April 9th and 11th, I have to be gone. That's part of the reason we aren't going to get through as much as I would like. And so I like the labs that we have coming up. And don't know why it does that. And so I'd like to do them. And what my plan is next week, we're just going to knock out the 2 labs, Tuesday and Thursday. So it'd be important to be here. You can, you'll be doing them in groups. So like, it could be the groups that you were in for the NIOSH lifting equation lab, or other things you've done during the semester. I don't really care, but I would like you to be in a group in case, it just helps. And also in case someone has to miss for whatever reason, you can use your group members to fill you in and help you, finish the assignment. So you'll be submitting your assignments as a group as well. So Tuesday, Thursday next week, we'll be doing that. The following week is when I have to be gone. And it's crazy because then we'll only have 4 class periods left. So we'll finish up sensation and perception, and we'll also get into workload and stress, but we won't cover those in as much detail as I would like. And so what I'm planning to do is combine the third and the final exam together. The total, it'll be shorter, so it'll be less questions than they would have been separately. And I may make it take home, but it'll be on Canvas. So you just, it won't be timed or anything. You just, you go on there and you answer the questions as you can. You could take a whole week. I'll make sure it's open for like a week during that final, like the last, starting towards the end of the last week of class, towards the middle of finals week, something like that. So you'll have about a week to work on it. Yeah, any questions? I think that's everything. All right. I had talked about a couple of optical illusions. We're going to get to a few, I guess. This one is the fun one. So it's actually Hank, the guy who we looked at, whose video we watched about muscle physiology. What I need you to do is I need you to stare at the screen for 30 seconds as soon as I start the video. And after we watch his, then we're going to watch Actually, I think I've got to plug this in. After we watch his, we're going to watch a couple that are aviation specific. One video doesn't necessarily have optical illusions. It's just talking about vision in aviation. And then the other is about illusions that can occur if you're piloting an aircraft. They would apply to other things as well. But so stare at the screen and hopefully the audio comes through here. I would like it to, so let's see.
Perspective to exploit the disconnect that exists between sensation and perception, between what your eyes see and what your brain understands. But not all illusions work that way. Some produce ghost effects or after images that take advantage of glitches in the physiology of human vision, like this flag. I'm not trying to make a political statement here, and I'm not going to ask you to swear allegiance to the Republic of Hank or anything. I mean, if I was going to start my own country, my flag would be way cooler than that. Not that I've thought about that a lot. And now look at this white screen. If you look at that flag for at least 30 seconds without moving your eyes, you'll see something, even though the screen is blank. An after image of the flag. But instead of being turquoise and black and yellow, it's red, white, and blue. Okay, so that's pretty...
So did anyone see that? I didn't say to keep your eyes fixated at the same point. That would have been important. If you're interested in reviewing what we covered last lecture, then he actually talks about a lot of the same concepts in here. We're not going to watch it though, but he does a good job of making it funny and interesting. So we're just going to watch a small part of this video. It's regarding the area on which you're able to focus. So we talked about the fovea and the macula last time. The fovea it's really the macula is a portion of your retina towards the center. I don't remember exactly where it is in relation to the optic nerve, but it is densely packed with cones. And that's where you're able to get clear, sharp vision. And as your vision moves from the center towards the periphery, then you get lower and lower resolution images. We talked about, I mentioned how my neuro professor said if you had that same resolution in your entire field of view, then your brain would have to be like 3 times as big just to process all of the information. So we're just really good at moving our heads and our eyes. So this is going to touch on that and talk about some of the issues that could occur in aviation due to the fact that we only have high resolution in that one spot.
Central vision represents a small conical area of only about 1 degree. To fully appreciate how small a 1 degree field is, and to demonstrate the foveal field, take a quarter from your pocket and tape it to a flat piece of glass, such as a window. Now, back off 4.5 feet from the mounted quarter and close one eye. The area of your field of view covered by the quarter is a 1 degree field. In terms of an oncoming aircraft, if you are capable of seeing an aircraft within your foveal field from 5,000 feet away, using only peripheral vision, you wouldn't detect it until you were only 500 feet away. Another example is, using foveal vision, we can clearly identify an aircraft flying at a distance of 7 miles. However, using peripheral vision outside the foveal field, we would require a closer distance of 0.7 of a mile to recognize the same aircraft. That is why when you were learning to fly, your instructor always told you to put your head on a swivel to keep your eyes scanning the wide expanse of space in front of your aircraft.
Any of those who are pilots, did your instructor say that? I'm just curious. Okay, keep your head on a swivel. Makes sense. The audio in this one isn't very good, but he's going to talk about the way that airstrips could appear as you're approaching for landing.
In our case, artificial. Other runways may play tricks on their perception. For example, here we have 3 different runways. One of them is the Edwards Air Force runway, the widest and longest runway in the world, used for the space shuttle. Second is Salvage Runway, the shortest commercial runway in the world. Last two pictures are from the Kucherville runway, which is the steepest runway in the world. They all have been taken at the same distance and altitude, however, we perceive them differently. The wide runway appears to be closer, which can cause the pilot to increase their altitude in the glide slope and land further down the landing threshold. On the other hand, the short runway may cause the pilot to feel they're too high and fly a low approach, landing short of the runway. The pilot will think the runway is too short and feel too high if the runway has an uphill slope. The opposite if the runway has a downhill slope. As a consequence of this, a pilot might have to abort the landing and go around.
Does that make sense? So if you're approaching an airstrip that's at a downward slope, it looks shorter. Is that what he said? Is that right? It looks shorter than it really is. Whereas if you're approaching from the side where it's upward sloping, maybe I'm getting that flipped. Pilots, is that right? Okay. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to keep it straight. So we talked about depth perception, and I checked I threw an eraser to Michael, and he caught it both times, but went with one eye or two. So, in these cases, hopefully you have both eyes working, but even if we can't really perceive depth, our brain is still pretty good at using angles to kind of estimate the length of the runway, for example, or the height that you are above it, even if it's an illusion because of the slope or the size of the airstrip. I'm curious if did anyone do the bathroom thing? Turn on the lights and watch your pupil not dilate, but constrict? Nobody? But has anyone done it? I think I asked that before. Yeah. So I was just thinking about that. And then actually, let's watch a little bit more of this one. It's related to that same concept of at least a vision at night and in the dark.
Experience, preparation, and trusting your instruments to prevent your occur. Photokinetic effect is best demonstrated by standing in the dark, staring at a single light for 6 to 12 seconds. Eventually, the light source will appear to make a small jagged and is not accidental. In more advanced stages, the autokinetic effect can lead to erratic but minor head and body movement as a person tries to realign with the moving object. I'm sure that everyone in here has noticed the effect take place when looking at a single light source in the dark, maybe while looking at the star at night. But what causes this illusion physiologically? Let's have a closer look. When the eye focuses on a single light point within darkness, it loses the ability to focus on other sources. This causes the eyeball to make small, jerky movements, which in turn makes the image projected onto the retina make small movements as well. The brain, which receives and interprets the picture from the retina, deduces that the cause of this movement must be from the movement of the object itself. As we know, this is not the case.
So just to re-explain what he said there, the macula, where you have that crystal clear vision, has a lot of, I hope I'm getting this right. I tend to, let's look at it real quick. I tend to mix them up. But I believe it's cones. Yeah. Cones color, and that I should remember that. But the macula tends to have a lot of cones. So that gives you nice color and high resolution images, but you need a lot of light to see it. When it's dark and you're focusing on a single light source, your macula isn't the best at seeing it. And so what happens is your eyes move around so that the light is hitting not right on the macula, but around it, where you have rods that are good at in low light and at low resolution. So the light appears to be moving around, even though it's your own body causing movement with your movement of your eyes. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. I have some other slides. I guess I'll post that slide deck as well. But not that they'll be on the exam or anything. They just are another example of some of these principles. When you design displays or controls, there are several things that you want to keep in mind. Obviously, it needs to be legible and audible. So you want to use, for example, so these are Dr. Fogelman's slides, and he has a certain way of doing them, and it's very consistent, and a lot of students can always pick them out. Oh, those are Dr. Fogelman's. So he likes, I believe this is, I'm not sure actually if this is Arial or Helvetica font, but he uses a nice clean font that's straightforward. Generally, with certain characters, it could be confusing sometimes what letter it happens to be, but generally it's a nice clean font. Have you ever tried to read? So like my mom, for example, sometimes sends emails in like this calligraphy font, and I'm just like trying to figure out what she was saying, because it's like it's fancy and it looks pretty, but I can't read it. So if you're designing displays to be used in the workplace, whether it's aviation or another industry, it needs to be legible. We talked about contrast before. So the best contrast is generally a white background with black, dark text. Has anyone ever seen PowerPoint slides like with blue background and red text or something? Yeah, it makes my eyes like hurt just trying to read the text. So you want to have high contrast, make sure it nice, clean font. And what else do you think might be important to make sure that something's legible if someone's going to read it? Machine operator, pilot. Huh? Good. The size. So you don't want it to be in little fine print. If it's really important, you need it to be big. And the same thing with audio. We're going to talk a little bit more about audio, but you want to remove the static and make sure it's a nice, crisp and clear sound, easy to distinguish what's being said. So this is, I guess I'm trying to think of a PowerPoint. I'm not sure I've seen a PowerPoint that had colors that did not contrast very well. Maybe they contrasted, just not well, but that didn't contrast. So if we had, instead of black text on here, like a really light gray, or I guess if you had the blue background, which I hate blue backgrounds on PowerPoints, but blue background with like turquoise green font is not going to contrast very well. You're not going to allow people to read what's on there. You need to keep context in mind. That's called top-down processing. And if you can make the signal redundant by sending it in two different forms, then if one fails to be perceived, to reach the intended, the person. Sorry. I have this anti-allergy medicine I take, but sometimes it's not very useful. So if I stop and I'm like holding my nose, it so you don't have a sneeze in the recording. So I like to think of this in terms of graphics, figures, for example, and charts that show data. And those are the slides that I'm going to show you in a minute. And then discriminability. So if you have two signals that are really similar to each other, it makes it hard to distinguish or discriminate between the two. Pictorial realism, you want to make sure that the outdoor image is matched on the display. So you don't want, the example here is, what if you had a thermometer that went the reverse way? So like the colder it got, the higher the higher the thermometer rose, the indicator, whatever it happened to be. Try to make it intuitive. And then the principle of the moving part is just that things should move in the direction that's intuitive. So if you move the joystick to the right, then whatever it is you're controlling should move to the right. Now in aviation, it's not always that way, at least with, I am unfamiliar with the terms, but if you pull, well, I guess it is intuitive, but you're pulling back on the stick will raise the nose, is that right? And then, and I know there are differences between manufacturers. So if I understand correctly, Airbus uses joystick and Boeing uses, I forget what they use. What does Boeing use? The yoke? Okay. So pulling back on the joystick or the yoke will pitch upward, correct? And for some people, that's not intuitive at first. But I guess, it makes sense. But you don't want to have something, moving the joystick to the left, making you turn to the right. The red, oh. Okay, I didn't know that. No, I didn't know that. That's interesting. I'm trying to think of another example, but so you step on the left rudder and the aircraft turns to the right.
He is correct. If your aircraft is pointing to the right, the left rudder is correct.
Okay. So you guys are the experts, not me. I'm not sure, but think about backing up your car, and that trips up some people, because if you turn, I'm just thinking of that example, if you turn the steering wheel to the right, then with the direction you've been moving, the tail end of your vehicle will move to the right. But if you're turned around, you're turning the steering wheel right, and it appears that you're going to the left. Let's look at my other slides here. This is for my graduate class. In occupational safety, we talk about data and visualization of data. And you know what? Going to use some different slides. Oh, well, okay. We'll stick with the graduate class slide. So I don't like this figure as much, but as the one I had elsewhere. So there are different ways of encoding data. You can use shape, size, color, the hue of the color, or the color saturation is another way people say color value, the intensity of the same hue, textures. Those are mostly used for categorical data. But some additions here are position on, say, an XY, the length of a bar, for example, or a column, angle or slope, the area of the object, or the volume of the object. Generally, if you are talking about quantitative data, position and length are much more intuitive. We're able to discriminate better differences between values. If we're talking about categorical data, then often shapes or different color, either saturation or hues, could be the best way to communicate that information. And if you're looking at a gradient, then the saturation or contrast might be a more optimal way of communicating that information. You don't want the user, if there's really important display, you don't want it to be far from where the user tends to be looking. So for a pilot, you don't want a really important display to be up over here to the left or to the right. You want it to be on the main display just below the, is it called the dash? I don't know. Just above the display where you look out the glare shield. So you don't want it to be away from that. You want it to be right in there. You also want it to be close to controls that are important. And if you so I think one of the videos mentioned that vision is considered our primary sense that we use maybe the most, or that's the most important. I'm not sure what they mean by that necessarily. For a pilot, though, it would be very important, right? So if you have the option of using audio or visual sources, it's better to use visual, but it's good to use both if you can. So the word is spoken and audible as well as displayed. So I'm thinking of there is a crash. It was a mid-air collision, like a Russian aircraft and a FedEx plane or something, like a freight aircraft. I don't remember how long ago it was. Is anyone familiar with that incident? Dang it. I need to think of one that you might be familiar with. What I'm thinking of is there's a feedback system in aircraft that audibly instructs the pilot to adjust altitude. I don't remember what the system's called or anything, but in that incident, the air traffic controller, there were I think there are two different air traffic controllers for these two different aircraft, and they were on a collision course, and they're both telling them to do the wrong thing. There's telling one to descend, or maybe the air traffic controller only had communication with one of the aircraft, I don't remember what happened exactly, but the system was saying to pull up, like to like gain altitude, and the air traffic controller was saying descend. And anyway, they followed the air traffic controller's advice, and they ended up colliding. The Russian aircraft was a passenger plane. But anyway, in instances like that where you get audible feedback from the system, then it's nice to also have a visual feedback as well. And especially in, for example, in aviation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the like universal language of aviation is English, right? It doesn't matter what country you're from. So you could have people with accents, and someone for whom English is not their native language. If they're only getting an audible feedback from the system, and maybe they're not familiar with the English accent or the way it's being pronounced, they might not really know exactly what sort of signal they're getting. We won't worry about those ones. So I showed you some color representations of these. Again, for quantitative data, position and length or height tend to be the most efficient at communicating information. So you can see with, well, I'm gonna let you guys look at them. So take a look at these graphs and tell me what sort of change do you think they're trying to communicate? These are interesting because they're displaying similar types of data, but the message isn't communicated the same. They're, well, all except number 2 are showing increases, but as the bullet point mentions, for these 2, you can perceive, although this one is kind of hard, but you can perceive that there is a difference in the rate of change, in the rate of increase. Here you can visualize that and see that. Here you can't really tell whether there is a change. I mean, it looks like a pretty similar step upward. So I showed you some graphics of these. These are different ways of communicating position and length for quantitative, not necessarily for qualitative data. And then for qualitative, it sort of goes in the reverse direction, not totally, but color and shape tend to be effective. And everyone loves pie charts. I'm gonna see if I can get this. Oh, that's why I don't have. I'm really proud of this pie chart that I made. And I would like to show it. Maybe. That's actually. Okay. Sorry, I just remembered this. actually, this is a cool activity. Let's go ahead and do it. So find a partner, or if you want to do it like have a trio, that's fine. If you have paper, pull out a piece of paper. It could be on your exam too, like on the back or something, if you don't have any paper. But I don't have my little whiteboards with me. Close your eyes, think of an animal, and draw it the best you can. Okay? Close your eyes, think of an animal, and draw it as best you can. And then, so, take like 30 seconds to do that. It doesn't need to be, can't think of a famous artist that's really realistic, but it doesn't have to be super realistic. And then show it to the people in your team or group and see if they can guess what animal you're trying to draw. So take 30 seconds and do that. So 20 more seconds. All right, so who is able to recognize their partners or their group members drawing? You guys know? No? Yes? Okay. So I think there's maybe a majority of people who are able to recognize versus those who weren't. The idea with this is that we as humans are really good at perceiving perceiving shapes and objects in space, and computers aren't. So the rest of that of this exercise is because so if you were to look at these numbers, can you tell me what they represent? So in the same way that you could look at your partner's drawing and maybe guess it, can you do it as quickly with this? Like maybe you could draw a graph and try to plot this out, and then you'd be able to see it. We're not very good at that, but computers are really good at it. And so that's one reason why we take data and information. Could be information about an aircraft or about a piece of heavy equipment or a machine, an industrial machine, takes those data and presents it in a way that we can more easily understand. So it's not going, hopefully it doesn't give you a whole bunch of numbers like this, but it gives you a gauge or a little figure or a moving line. If you've ever seen a control room, it may have several displays, and you may see, I remember seeing displays at the mines where, data, there was incoming data, and there was this line that was just like moving, and like that's all they did with it really. It was just make sure it didn't go above or below these two control thresholds. So these are the examples I wanted to show about position, area, shape. I don't know. I like to use a little bit of color. Dr. Fogelman is like against color mostly in pictures. So you can see those there. For quantitative data, what did we say? Which one is the best and second best? Position and length. Those are the top two. So you want to try and use those. In industry, I see pie charts all the time. And if you ask Dr. Fogelman, he hates them. And for good reason, because they're not really, I mean, they're kind of in the middle in terms of effectiveness. But so you can see here for quantitative data, they're number 4 out of 7. But they're maybe it's just they're a little bit too popular and people go crazy with them. So for ordinal data, again, position is number 1. So we're not talking about quantitative necessarily, ordinal. So there's an order. Position is still number 1, but then you have color saturation and color hue for the top 3. For nominal data, meaning it's just a name, it's just a category. Now I can't remember where I got this information. I created all the charts for it, but I'm not totally sure why position is still number 1 here. But you again have color hue and saturation and then shape, and it decreases from that. So here's my pie chart that I'm proud of. You can make art with pie charts. So it's a pyramid, right? The sunny side of the pyramid, the shady side of the pyramid, and the sky. But they're not always ideal for representing quantitative data, which lots of people like to use them for that. But there are better ways generally of communicating the same type of information. For example, well, composition. You're trying to show out of 100% what the composition of something is. Pie charts aren't bad, but there are ways to communicate the same information with length, for example, or area, a different type of area. All right, enough of that one. Has anyone seen this chart before? Can you? Oh, okay. In what class? Oh, okay. All right, good. So this is a famous chart. Can you explain it? At least a little bit?
On the left-hand side, when Napoleon went to go invade Russia, that's how many soldiers he started off with. And as he goes across,
The thickness, right?
It shows how much soldiers he started off with. And as you go across, it tells the time and shows how many soldiers that he lost going into Moscow. And then the same going back, from Moscow to France again.
Yeah.
So the darker colors going back and the light colors going to Moscow.
I think this is on a map. So this is the route they took.
Yes.
So this figure is famous because it's showing there are like 4 or 5 things being communicated all at once with the same graphic. So you can, I mean, Napoleon wasn't the only one who failed to take Moscow. It seems like, and it's not just Hitler as well. I'm trying to remember, someone else tried to take Moscow, and everyone in history who's ever done it realizes they run into 2 major factors. It's far away from Europe. It's a long ways, especially to march. And it gets really cold in the winter. and that's, I think, I'm not even sure if there are necessarily any battles in this march. This is all, well, not all, but I think the majority of these losses in men is from the cold. You can see the thickness of the line when he gets back. So a lot of casualties to try and take Moscow. And again, don't try and take Moscow if history teaches you anything. But there's something with illustrations of data. There are two. You can sort of clump things together into just two broad categories: measures and dimensions. Measures generally represent values, like quantitative data that you could do math with. You could take the average of it, you could add it up. Dimensions aren't necessarily, sometimes they are, but generally dimensions are more qualitative. So one dimension to this graphic is the geography. Now I know you could look at GPS locations, but one dimension is geography. One measure is the size of Napoleon's army. One dimension is the time of year. So down below, it talks about, or somewhere on here, this is a low resolution copy, but the dates are listed. And I can't remember if this is the elevation, or I don't remember what this one is. Oh, okay. This is the temperature. So on a separate chart, I mean, it's combined, but it's also separate. You can see the temperature. So several measures and dimensions all crammed into the same visualization. Sound is a pressure wave that moves through the air. Sound and vibrations are the same thing. The only difference is the medium through which they're traveling. So the sound of my voice is traveling through the air, and it's a pressure wave that leaves my mouth and reaches your ears. And we'll talk about the anatomy, but your brain interprets those vibrations, and you can understand language. It's amazing. The brain is amazing. Vibrations are the same thing, but they travel through a solid. Every once in a while, like a couple nights ago, my wife and I had the kids in bed, and we were like staying in the kitchen, like getting a midnight snack before, I don't know, and just like we usually have like 15 minutes or something each day to talk before it's like, okay, we're tired, let's go to bed. And so we were talking, and someone who has a much better sound system than I do drove by with really low and loud bass. So what happens if you're parked next to someone, or even if they drive by your house that has really loud bass and like a really nice sound system and really loud bass? Yeah, we could hear the windows rattling and like really deep, low frequency sounds. You feel them a lot of times more than, I mean, you hear them as well, but they travel through solids better, and they will cause more vibration of solids than a really high pitched sound. So low frequency sound, those low deep bass sounds, will travel farther than high frequency sounds. And it's not for those reasons. We won't really get into the reasons, but think of it as a wave, just like a ripple in a pond, or a wave on the beach. It travels in just the same sort of way. It's a pressure wave moving through the air, or a vibrational wave in a solid. The wavelength of any wave is the distance between one peak or one trough to the other. So from this point to this point, we would measure that, and that's the wavelength, the length of the wave. Frequency is measured in hertz, and hertz, well, so wavelength here, we're measuring it in nanometers. You could measure it in other things as well. I mean, you just go up or down, micrometers or microns or millimeters or meters. That's a really low frequency wave. But so cycles per second is represented by hertz. So 1 hertz means that it took 1 second for this wave to travel that length, or to go from peak to peak. We can, there's a little equation where we can find one from the other. And it's not here. Don't worry about it though. But given lambda, which is a constant, it's a value, then you can calculate frequency if you know the wavelength, and vice versa. The amplitude of the wave is the height. Okay, so wavelength is peak to peak. The amplitude is the height. So from the 0 point to the top of the peak, that would be your amplitude. And with noise and sound, that is perceived as the loudness. The frequency is perceived as pitch. We didn't talk about logs, did we? Or did we? I mix up which classes we've talked about it and which we haven't. So does everyone remember ever learning about logs in a math class? Okay, so it's like a lot of math, it's a different language, and so we will interpret. When you see log with nothing below, then you can assume it's log base 10, which on the slide it says 10. If you don't see it, assume it's 10. I'll write it down here, log base 10. If I were to punch this into my calculator and I just hit log 100, what I am asking my calculator is 10 to what power equals 100? So log base 10, 100 is really just saying 10 to what power would give me 100. So what is the answer to this one? 2, right? So 10 squared, 10 times 10 gives you 100. If I said log base 10 of 1,000, to interpret that, what I'm asking is 10 to what value will give me 1,000. And what is that? (10 to the 3). So 10 times 10 times 10. Let's go in the other direction now. If I said log of 1, so 10 to what value would give me 1? This one's a little bit trickier. It's 0. So anything raised to the 0 equals 1. So this would give us 0. This would give us 3. Logs. Logs are a way of representing data on a large scale in a smaller way. We won't get much more into logarithms, but we do use them for this equation here. If you are going to add sound pressure levels together, then you've got to you've got to use this equation. So how do we usually measure sound? What units? I heard it. What was it? Decibels. Decibels are actually not a unit. I mean, we treat them like a unit, but they actually represent a ratio. And so it could be for sound. It could be for anything, really. But I mentioned that sound is a pressure wave. So it's actually, we measure it in terms of pressure. And one of the units for pressure is pascals. Although Dr. Fogelman doesn't use pascals, he uses microbars. There's like, I don't know how many different units for pressure, but there are a lot of different units that you could pick. And I mean, I can think of several. But anyway, there is a reference. So P naught or P sub 0 is simply a reference pressure, and he has it in microbars as 0.0002. And the level that the pressure level that you've measured is P1 at the top here. So you take the ratio of these two numbers, and you take the log of that, and then you multiply it by 20, and that will convert it into decibels. Simply doing that isn't super useful if we don't have an instrument to measure in pressure. I have stuff that will measure in decibels, so it does this math for us. But if you need to add 2 decibel levels together, then you need to convert from decibels to pressure and then back into decibels. We're not going to worry about that. Just want you to be aware of that process. These are some examples of sound pressure levels, and we'll focus on the decibel scale because that's usually what we measure it with. If you notice here, reason to use a log scale rather than the linear or the natural scale for sound pressure is that we get these numbers that are harder to work with. It's hard for us to perceive the differences here from 0.0002 all the way up to 2000. We just don't have a reference for that, really. A decibel scale makes it nice and easy to conceptualize the numbers and the differences, although it does throw us off in some ways, but I'll save that for like OSHA training or something. So aircraft takeoff, 120. I've seen that higher. That might be like the typical. I'm not sure what type of aircraft. Obviously, it's going to change with the type of aircraft, the type of engines, but we typically start to experience pain at 140 decibels, and that's actually not that uncommon. So Matt and a couple of other undergrads are helping me do some pro bono work at the Humane Society, the Yavapai Humane Society, and one of the issues they have is that when potential adopters, so like families and people come in to walk into the kennel rooms, the dogs start barking and the floors and the walls are all concrete, and I don't know what they have for their tiles, but it's really loud. And actually, so we took some measurements. Some of the peak noises were in the 130s in that room. So, you know, it's not sustained at that level, but if you can imagine like 3 or 4 dogs bark all at the same time by chance, and the noise reverberates in that room, it's loud, and it's uncomfortable. Like, I haven't felt pain, but it's definitely uncomfortable. So it's not that uncommon. Or if, I mean, I'm thinking of my kids, but if I'm holding my 2-year-old and he's like screaming and my ear is right there, it's not quite painful, but I'll bet it's up here. I have seen numbers on it and it is over at 100. I think it was like 110, like a crying kid right in your ear is is rock band level. That just gives you an idea, the sense of the, well, and real quick, of the differences here. If we are talking on OSHA's terms, every change in 10 decibels it means it's 4 times as loud. And remember, we've converted, this is a log scale. So every change in 10 decibels is 4 times as loud. So according to this, the symphony orchestra during Fortissimo is 4 times as loud as a subway train. Apparently, I guess someone measured that. Pure tone means that you have just a single waveform, so a single frequency. In nature, we don't usually get that. We are receiving multiple frequencies all at once. And bandwidth includes, it indicates the frequency spectrum of sound. So it goes, for sound, I'm trying to think of the upper level. It goes from 0 up to in the thousands of hertz. I'm not sure what the maximum level is there, but real quick, what do you think is the human speech range of frequencies? Do you think, I guess I'll give it to you in 50-50. Do you think it's on the low or the high end of sound frequencies? So it's on the low end. We, humans in general, don't produce sound frequencies that are very high. I think against nature, we're probably pretty middle of the road, but against industrial machines and equipment, we're very low. So machines tend to produce very high frequency. They can also produce low frequency. It depends on the equipment or the machine you're talking about, but they tend to produce very high frequency. So that's one reason why if you have someone who's worked in a loud industry, noisy industry for most of their life, they'll typically start to lose their hearing on the high frequency end, and it travels down towards the low. So I remember one of my high school teachers saying that his father he was a farmer and he'd worked around tractors and heavy equipment his whole life. And in the later stages of his life, he could not hear his wife, but he could hear his sons. So it wasn't selective hearing, I think. I mean, you could use that excuse, but he had lost his hearing down right to that range in between. There is some overlap in male and female voice frequencies. So I don't remember the numbers, but it would be, it would be something like this, where these are male pitches and these are female. So you can see from here to here, there's possible overlap, but he had lost, I mean, I don't know, maybe it is right here, but he had lost all the hearing above that line in terms of frequencies, and he could only hear frequencies below it. There are 2 different types of weightings that are applied. There's actually more than 2. We're just going to touch on the 2, but weightings applied to sound pressure levels, C scale and A scale. In like OSHA, for example, in safety, we use the A scale. It tends to weight things more heavily in the speech frequencies, what would be important for humans and human health. So here's an example of, is a graph of our range of hearing and the thresholds for different frequencies. So you can see for really low thresholds, it's got to have a fairly large amplitude, 80 decibels, for us to hear it. And it can go pretty high and we'll still perceive it. But below that, we don't pick it up at all. You can see the threshold for comfort is, it falls down here a little bit at the lower frequencies, but then it's pretty consistent along other, up to the higher frequencies. I was thinking 10,000. I don't know if the number goes higher though. Sound frequency may go higher than 10,000, but hertz. Anyway, so just to give you an idea, okay, it does. But I don't know how much higher. We can perceive from 20 to 20,000 hertz. Our highest sensitivity is actually higher than human speech frequencies. I believe our frequencies are in the low hundreds. The numbers I've seen are from 60 for the lowest males to like 250 or 280 for the highest females. All right. So that sound pressure wave travels through the air. Think of it as it's a vibration that's traveling through air. It reaches our ear canal, travels through here, and reaches our eardrum, or it's called the tympanic membrane. And think of it like beating on a drum. It actually beats on our eardrum. And the eardrum transfers that pressure wave in air to a vibration in a solid. And so it vibrates, and that in turn vibrates these three little bones inside the inner ear. Well, I guess it's called the middle ear technically, but I'm trying to think of the Greek terms. I know it's incus, malleus, and stapes. I just don't remember if it's in that order. But malleus is hammer. I remember that. Think of like a mallet. I think stapes is stirrup. So, but we call it hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Those are the English translations for the Greek words. Because this one kind of looks like a hammer. This one kind of looks like an anvil. And that kind of looks like a stirrup. So that vibrational energy travels through the bones to our cochlea, which is the inner ear. Now, one thing to point out about these bones is that there are little tendons and muscles attached to them. And we have a built-in mechanism for controlling some of the sound pressures we're exposed to. So if you go to a rock concert and there's a steady, loud sound, these little muscles in here pull on the bones and they pull them apart. Not very much, a little bit, but so that vibrational energy doesn't make it as efficiently to your inner ear. That's great for consistent high sound levels, but think of sounds where it's really loud, but really fast and over in milliseconds. Think military or law enforcement or just hobbies. So shooting a firearm, that's called impulse or impact noise or sound. It's so fast that your body has no chance to react to it. It's going to damage your hearing unless you've got, protection. There's actually a big debate right now on whether silencers should be made more available to protect the hearing of. Now I don't remember if this was just for like law enforcement or if it was just in general. I mean, you can see the pros and cons to each side, right? You will protect the hearing of the law enforcement. The law enforcement has restrictions on what sort of silencers and stuff they can use. If you make it more available to them, it'll protect their hearing more. But I think the concern is that some of that will get into, you know, those silencers will get into the hands of people that you don't want them to. I think we overestimate the abilities of silencers, though, because we watch too many movies and TV shows. Anyway, you know, and I don't know what the right answer is on that, but from my perspective as an industrial hygienist, so another student in the past, a couple years ago, and I were measuring noise for the City of Prescott police officers, and that was something that was an option we were recommending to them, although they have restrictions. But from the purely hearing health of the police officers perspective, you know, that's something that it would be helpful to have, at least in their training when they train at the shooting range. And maybe there are less restrictions for that. I don't remember what they said about that, but anyway, so here's the malleus is the hammer, the incus is the anvil, and the stapes is the stirrup. This is you can see these ligaments that hold it, but there are also there are tendons with these muscles that when they contract, it'll pull the malleus away from the tympanic membrane. So now if it's a really loud noise, it may reach across that gap and transfer energy. So it's not like you're not going to hear anything, but it helps to reduce the amount of energy transferred. It's called the acoustic reflex. You can see, though, that it takes 35 to 150 milliseconds for that reflex to happen. So with gunshots or an explosion, there's not enough time for it to happen. Once we reach the inner ear, we're not going to worry about the semicircular canals, but the cochlea is a snail-shaped structure, and inside we have these membranes. This is just a cross section of the cochlea right here. Like if we took a saw and chopped it in half. It has these different ducts. The part I'm most interested in is here, where this is where the magic happens. So you have this membrane called the tectorial membrane, and think of it like playing a keyboard. You have these hair cells on the basilar membrane here. And as that vibration energy travels through the snell, travels through the cochlea, depending on the frequency, it'll play. Think of the hair cells like the keys on a keyboard. It'll play at a certain point along the spiral. So higher frequencies stop shorter and lower frequencies travel farther. So they'll travel farther higher up to the little apex here of the cochlea. But vibration energy causes the tectorial membrane to play the hair cells at that point, and then it creates an action potential and a signal down your auditory nerve. Don't worry about the pathway so much, but know that, I think the brain is amazing in the way that it's able to hear these different sounds and able to make sense of them and interpret them. So we will pick up there next time, which will be in like a week and a half. Or no, it'll be like 2.5 weeks. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So the physiology lab is getting bumped back. We're gonna do it in class on Tuesday. It'll be due later. Right, yeah, it'll be due later.